It is time to do the mid-year freakout book tag. This is my first time doing it. I'm very excited. I joined BookTube in August of last year, so well after the timing of it being appropriate to even do this tag, but I watched plenty of people do it last year, so I'm excited to do it this year because I have some very big notables to talk about. So the first question is the best book that I have read so far this year. I think a lot of my book highlights are going to be from June. In June, I read so many great books. I read one of my favorite romances this year and my favorite thriller for this year. My favorite romance is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I think this is a masterpiece. I think that's Abby Jimenez at her absolute best. And then I read The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Michelon. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but both of these were super, super good. Most recent 5 stars as well. It's hard to pick which one is probably my absolute favorite between these two, but if I had to pick one, and it would marginally probably be The Quiet Tenant. I absolutely love this. The writing was right up my alley. It was exactly what I like. The tone of this was exactly what I look for in my thriller books. Yeah, it was just excellent. I read this book for the Thrills and Chills Camp Nightmare. So I did a whole reading vlog for that book, or this book anyway, so go and watch that if you're interested in hearing about my in-depth thoughts on it. Best sequel. I read 2 sequels. Both of them are romances. One was from Abby Jimenez and the other one was Anna Huang. So Anna Huang's Twisted Games, and then Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. And I gave both of these the exact same rating of 3.75, both enjoyable for their own purposes. But I would have to say my favorite sequel, that's really difficult because I loved Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez so much, and then when I read Yours Truly, I didn't love it as much as I liked Part of Your World. Granted, I do want to reread this at some point just to solidify my feelings on it, because I'm like, am I crazy? Everyone, my general perception of this book is that this is everybody's favorite. But anyways, and then Twisted Games, which is the second book in the Twisted Love series, I enjoyed so much more than Twisted Love. Twisted Love was very middle of the road. It was a good introduction for me to Anna Huang's writing and just that world in general and those kind of romances, and I really enjoyed Twisted Games so much more. So I think based on that, I would have to say that Twisted Games is probably my favorite sequel of the year. I know, shocking, I'm an Abby Jimenez stan. The next question is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to, and I have 2 books to answer this question. The first one is Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. It's a given why I'm excited for that one. I think everybody's kind of read it so far potentially, but I am waiting for it from my library. And then the other one is A Step Past Darkness by Vera Kurian. I read Never Saw Me Coming last year, really liked that, and enjoyed just generally how that thriller went about, and it was a debut, I believe, for her too. So really, really great. If you haven't read it yet, do it. It's a really good time. So I'm looking forward to just reading her other book. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I won't lie to you, I'm not the best at keeping up with new releases and just being first in line to get a book. I'm really not great at it, so I don't really know how to answer this question. So we're just going to move on. The biggest disappointment this year, I have, I think, 2. Yeah. One of them being Flores and Miss Paula. This was kind of pitched as, and even the blurbs on the back of the book, I thought it was going to be about a mother and daughter rebuilding their relationship with each other after the passing of their father and husband. And there is all this history between this mother and daughter. And I thought that it was going to be a really nice exploration of their relationship and just a lot of unpacking trauma. And there was this note that was found underneath her father's urn, written by her mom, I believe. And so it's not a mystery at all. It was just kind of I thought the focus of the book was going to be on these 2 characters coming together. And instead, I got a lot of Flores in her workplace. All of her, you hear from both women, and Flores' chapters, majority of it was her in her workplace, sorting out what's going on there. And then for Miss Paula, it was a lot of her kind of developing or building this close friendship with this other gentleman. And they both were working through their, not even working through their issues separately. It was just you were following along with them in this snapshot of time separately. And literally the closing chapters, then these two women come together and do the unpacking and talk with each other and try and rebuild that mother-daughter relationship with each other. I thought it was like, there were moments in this that had some really beautiful writing, and I had tabbed quite a few pages and sentences, especially ones depicting like grief and just the way certain things were written. So, you know, in that way it was great, but it didn't, I felt like I was kind of bamboozled after I read it. I was like, I just followed along with somebody in their workplace and this woman developing like a semi-situationship with this man in her neighborhood. It was really disappointing because, yeah, it was just not what I expected it to be. The other really disappointing read is The Garden by Claire Beams. Really beautiful cover. Probably, yeah, the most beautiful cover I think there is. I'm a sucker for flowers and whatnot, so if my boyfriend's watching this. But this was really, I wouldn't say disappointing, but I went in expecting one thing, and with expectations, it's funny because you don't want to set expectations up too high where you're just setting yourself up for failure with a book. And it's like, if you go in expecting one thing, like there's a really good chance it's not going to be that. But, you know, based on how this was kind of pitched, and I was expecting something a little bit more thoroughly plotted out and whatnot, and it didn't work for me, unfortunately. But I did a whole video talking about this book, so go watch that if you'd like to know more in-depth thoughts on it. Speaking of plot, the next one is a book that was the biggest surprise, and this book was a surprise because there was absolutely no plot in it. This is pure literary fiction, as literary as it can get, I think. And it was the very first book that I had read this year, and that is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I really liked this. This was pleasantly surprising, and it was additionally surprising because, like I said, there wasn't much plot in this. There was like a cast of characters you loosely follow, and they're up in a orbiting Earth in space. I don't want to go too much into the synopsises of any of these books, but I was surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did because of the lack of plot. Like, oftentimes I do need kind of something to kind of keep me going throughout it, but I just loved the writing within this. I did a whole video talking about this book and sharing some of my favorite passages from it too. So if you go watch that, I think and hope you'll see what I mean. This is not going to be a book for everybody. And I do see quite a few reviews on Storygraph just kind of saying like, oh, nothing happens in here, there's no plot, like you don't even follow along with these characters, characters aren't fleshed out. That's not what to go into this book expecting. It's some really beautiful commentary and writing on what it means to be human, things that make us human, and when all those things are removed, you know, who we are after that. That sounds really dramatic. It's it's not that dramatic. And then obviously really good captures or descriptions of Earth from space and whatnot. So I don't know, it was just, I think it was the perfect thing at the right time. And I think if I read this last month or tried to read it last month, like if I didn't read it at the beginning of the year, I probably wouldn't have been able to get through it because, again, there's not much plot. But I think if you just consume this slowly and just take your time with it and just go in it with the proper expectations and that is just go in for the great writing. Favorite new author, debut or new to you? I have a couple of answers for this. One being Clemence Michelon. I mentioned in the vlog where I read this that I'm going to read whatever else this author puts out just because I really liked the way she wrote this and delivered the story. There was different narration styles within here, which I appreciated. I appreciate some of the things that she was trying to say in here. I have yet to tab it itself, but I took pictures or screenshots of what I liked and highlighted on my e-reader so I can eventually tab this. The other one is Nick Medina. I read Sisters of the Lost Nation a few months ago. loved it and put his other books on hold at my library so I could read his backlist. Oh, and then I'm just looking at my story graph of all the books that I read this year. Eliza Clark. I read Boy Parts earlier this year. Really, really enjoyed it. Talked about it in my best books of 2024 so far video. Loved the writing within this. This was just, it was just great. And like, I didn't know if I picked it up not knowing if I was going to actually enjoy it or not, because I didn't really quite know what it was about. New fictional crush. Okay, now you know that it is going to be an Abby Jimenez. And it's going to be a man from the Part of Your World series. Which man, you might ask? You know what? I think, and this might have to do with some recency effect, but I loved Justin in Just for the Summer. His humor was just so spot on, and it was very much aligned with my own humor. I was giggling whenever he would be like joking around. He was very like lighthearted, and just he showed up for Emma too in a way that she really needed it. And you know, we love a man who just knows how to show up in a relationship, you know? So yeah, I'd probably say Justin. I feel like Abby Jimenez just knows how to write really great men and very lovely male characters who are just green flags. Favorite fictional character. So interesting take, potentially, not even a take, but Irene from The Garden. While I didn't love this book, I liked following along with Irene and being in her thoughts. She was a character who didn't love what was going on. She was very critical of her surroundings, very critical of the doctors and the situation as a whole. She didn't love it, but she was put in a situation where she desperately wants a child, and this hospital that they go to is kind of like, she thinks it's her last resort, as all these women are kind of told to think that way. I just liked following along with her. She was very like sharp and witty and just like very critical, would call people out on stuff, and yeah, just overall liked being in her mind and following along with her as a character. And then I would have to say Anna from Sisters of the Lost Nation. I think Nick Medina just did a wonderful job writing Anna as a character. I mentioned, I think in a wrap-up potentially, that she was written in a way where it felt like she was sitting right next to me, telling me her story and like talking about what was going on, and you know, following along with her too. It was like very much a story of just like development for her as like a person and just who she is in her identity. A book that made you cry. I don't think I've ever like full on shed tears reading a book, but I have gotten misty-eyed twice, and that was to Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen, and then also Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Book that made you happy. I feel like this entire video is just an Abby Jimenez like ad basically, but really any of the books in Abby Jimenez writes, you know, they all tend to make me happy or giggle in some way. But I would say that oddly enough, The Guest List, and the reason I'm saying a thriller made me happy was because it was the first thriller I gave 5 stars to in such a long time. My 5-star thriller was in a drought phase for so long, and it was just absolutely perfection for me, and that made me very happy. It made me so happy I made a whole video talking about The Guest List and my enjoyment of it. And then the other one is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. The way that that ended had just like literally warmed my heart. Most beautiful book, bought or received. I have one in my hands. Orbital's pretty gorgeous. All the colors, I really love that. I think that that is really pretty. The other most beautiful book, like I mentioned before, is The Garden. Even the spine has like some pretty flowers on the front, and yeah, I think that that's a really beautiful book. A book I need to read by the end of the year. So obviously a lot of, or the 2 new releases from this year that I mentioned before, I would ideally like to read those by the end of the year. But also I would like to read a couple of books that I own on my shelf that I have not cracked open or read. Typically my MO is to really utilize my library to its fullest extent, and then if I really like the book, I'll buy it and own it so I can reread it. But 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King I would love to read. This is a short story collection by her. I have a couple of other books from her. I'm a Lily King stan through and through. And then The Couple's Trip by Ulf Vensler. I've just had this forever, and every time I look at my shelf it looks at me, and I know I need to read it. It's a thriller, and I love the cover. It's beautiful too. So yeah, definitely want to read that as well. And then I do also, my brother gifted this to me a while ago, and that is Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez. My brother has really great taste in books, so gotta get to this one. I want to try and tackle A Little Life this year, but I don't know. I'm also still on the fence of whether or not I even want to read it, to be honest. I'm not quite sure. But the one that I got has a really good, like, flop, you know? Anyways, maybe A Little Life. I don't know. We'll see. So that is the Midyear Freakout book tag. I keep wanting to say Midyear book freakout tag, which is not correct. But anyways, thank you very much for watching to the end. If you have read any of these books I've talked about, do let me know your own experiences, or if we had answers in common at all. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you are liking what you are reading, and I will see you in the next video.